Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Bhakti Fundamentals. Today, we return with part 2 of our discussion on the nature of the self, or Jiva Tattva, as it's known in Sanskrit. Jiva is just the Sanskrit term for the soul, or the self. And last week, we learned that we are each individual, eternal souls, or jivas, and not these material bodies that we see in the mirror every day. This is pretty groundbreaking news for us, and it's also good news. If we're eternal, it means we cannot ever die. Only our material bodies age and become diseased and die. After hearing part 1, however, you may have been thinking to yourself, yeah, I've heard we have a soul before. We'll talk about that wording in a second. But I don't see it. I see my body, but I don't see the soul, who I actually am. So how do I know it's there? To use an analogy, this is actually like asking, how do I know my body has a cold if I can't see the virus particles? Well, we know our body is sick if we detect cold symptoms. Unless we are asymptomatic, but hey, material analogies fail at some point. But generally, there are symptoms of bodily disease. And similarly, we know of the presence of the soul due to its symptoms. Sometimes when we can't perceive something with our physical senses, we assume it doesn't exist. Yet, there are countless things that are beyond our direct sensory perception. For example, we can't see air, radio waves, or sound waves, nor can we detect tiny bacteria without assistance. Certain animals can hear frequencies that are beyond our hearing range, but this doesn't mean those sounds aren't real. It simply means our senses are limited in their capacity. With the help of tools like microscopes and other instruments, we're often able to detect things that our senses alone cannot perceive. In the same way, spiritual reality exists beyond our immediate perception. Bhakti Yoga helps us develop the ability to perceive that spiritual reality by refining our spiritual awareness beyond the limits of our physical, material senses and mind. For instance, through the lens of the Gita, we learn how to detect the presence of the soul. The Gita teaches that the symptom of the soul is consciousness. In other words, wherever we observe consciousness, we can understand that the soul is present. Let's take a moment to turn to one of the verses from the Gita to explore this concept further. In chapter 2, verse 17, Krishna says to Arjuna, "That which pervades the entire body you should know to be indestructible. No one is able to destroy that imperishable soul." Now, it's helpful to examine the purport or explanation to this verse of the Gita. In the Gita, there are the verses spoken by Krishna and Arjuna predominantly, and then there are explanations of the verses. The explanations in the Gita we study from are written by A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, and he explains in the purport to this verse that the symptom of the soul is consciousness. Consciousness pervades the entire body. But what does this mean? It means that even though you, the soul, are situated within the body, described as residing in the heart region, you are still aware of everything happening throughout your body. For example, if you stub your toe or a brush pulls out a hair from your head, you are instantly aware of it. This awareness is due to the soul's influence being spread throughout the body in the form of consciousness. Although the soul is localized, its presence extends across the body, allowing you to perceive sensations and experiences from head to toe. We have conscious awareness that pervades our whole body, and this conscious awareness indicates the presence of the soul, which again is us. And this point leads us to two other important ones. One, we are individual souls, each with our own individual consciousness. Everyone is aware of the pains and pleasures of their own body. Take the example of stubbing your toe. You immediately know it happened because you are aware of the pain in your foot. However, you don't know if someone else stubs their toe unless they tell you, or you happen to witness it. You don't directly experience the pain in their body, only in your own body. This shows that our consciousness is limited to our individual body, highlighting the fact that each of us is an individual soul with our own unique consciousness. That's the first key point to understand. And the other important point is that wherever there is consciousness, there is the soul. So this applies to, say, animals too. An animal is just a jiva or soul in a different body. The Bhakti Yoga perspective, stemming from the Bhagavad Gita, is an expansive vision of life. In the Gita, chapter 5, verse 18, it is said, "The humble sage, by virtue of true knowledge, sees with equal vision a learned and gentle sage, a cow, an elephant, a dog." And of course, this verse indicates more than just the examples listed. It teaches us that a truly spiritual person, equipped with spiritual knowledge, sees the soul in all living beings regardless of external form. Hence, in Bhakti Yoga, we embrace a vegetarian ahimsa or nonviolent philosophy. For those of you with pets, you probably notice their unique personalities. They're all different, right? Even two dogs of the same breed can have completely distinct personalities. This is because there's a different soul or jiva present in each animal body. There's a helpful analogy to explain this idea. Imagine you have a lamp, and you're trying different light bulbs of varying wattages in it. The same electrical current, representing the soul, is flowing through each bulb. But a 40-watt bulb shines much dimmer than a 100-watt bulb. In the same way, human consciousness can be compared to the 100-watt bulb, enabling us to engage in higher rational thought and to reflect on the deeper questions of life. Those in animal bodies and other life forms, on the other hand, may operate at the level of a 40-watt, 25-watt, or even 15-watt bulb. The same electrical current, or soul, is present in all of them, but consciousness is expressed differently depending on the body's capability. This analogy helps us understand how the soul is the same in all beings, but the level of conscious expression varies according to the material body that the soul is inhabiting. Now, at this point, you might be saying to yourself, I know I have a soul. I knew that when I clicked to watch this video. But actually, that's the common misunderstanding. If you say, I have a soul, you are saying that you are something other than the soul. And most likely, you are identifying yourself as your body. In actuality, though, you are the soul, and you inhabit a body which you use as you might a car. It may seem like we are splitting hairs. However, the difference between I have a soul and I am the soul and I have a body is huge. If we identify with the body as ourself, then our actions in life will primarily be aimed at pleasing, beautifying, and enhancing the body. But if we understand that we are not the body, but the spirit soul within, then the pushings and pullings of our material body take a backseat to our higher self. Armed with knowledge of the self, we can reprioritize our lives and live more in accordance with who we actually are. This knowledge is so beneficial and will help us in every stage of our lives. For instance, knowledge of the soul helps us when our bodies fall sick. At those times, we can remember that we, the spirit soul, aren't really sick, only our material bodies are. It also helps us when we're trying to make decisions as our bodies age. Many people opt for Botox and plastic surgery because they identify strongly with their bodies. However, when we identify instead as the soul within, we can accept aging more gracefully as a natural process for the material body. And of course, knowledge of who we are helps us at the most critical time of all, at the time of our body's death. Because as we also learn in the Gita, we and our loved ones can't die. No one can. Only the material body dies at the time of death. In fact, in spiritual life, we actually say that someone leaves their body instead of dies, because at the time of death, the soul leaves the body, leaving the body lifeless. Let's actually look at a verse that speaks more clearly to this point. In the Gita, chapter 2, verse 12, Krishna tells Arjuna, "Never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, nor in the future shall any of us cease to be." Here, Krishna is explaining to Arjuna and to us that each soul has always existed and will always exist as a personal, individual being. So first of all, we never have died and never will. That's already very comforting news. But secondly, we're not just eternal, but we are eternally individuals. This is a very important point. You and I are different jivas, different souls, and will always be different souls. We didn't and won't ever lose our individuality. And Krishna also states in this verse that he is eternal and individual. Now, in our last session, recall that we talked about the qualities of the soul or spirit, that we are Sat, Chit, Ananda, eternal, full of knowledge and full of bliss. But those are common qualities that we share. Just as we discussed how our consciousness is limited to our own individual body, similarly, we are unique individuals, unique souls. Even now, each of our experiences of the world is unique. Two people can have the same experience, but they will perceive it differently and react differently. Our personalities are different. We are unique, and that is retained always. This is an important point for Arjuna to hear because it's a battlefield, and it appears that a lot of people will die. In reality, though, they will leave their bodies and move on to their next destination. So this knowledge of the self, of the soul, drives away the fear that death is the end, because it's not. Next, one might logically ask, so what exactly does happen to us at the time of death? Well, Krishna addresses this in the very next verse. In other Bhakti Fundamentals videos, we cover this issue more in depth. However, we will speak to it in brief now. In chapter 2, verse 13 of the Gita, Krishna says, "As the embodied soul continuously passes in this body from boyhood to youth to old age, the soul similarly passes into another body at death. A sober person is not bewildered by such a change." At the time of death for our bodies, the soul doesn't die, we learn. It moves on. We move on. As this verse very logically points out, even within this life, the body is changing from year to year, minute to minute, second to second, even small changes. Cells are always regenerating, and over the course of this lifetime, our material bodies undergo dramatic transformations from childhood to youth to old age. And we, the soul within, are just witnessing these changes. We, the soul, are not actually aging. We are the observer. In a sense, we are already transmigrating or transitioning from one body to another as we pass through different stages of life. There's no going back to our childhood body or our teenage body. It's much like a caterpillar morphing into a butterfly. This change happens within one lifetime. And the butterfly can't go back to being in the caterpillar body. It has already moved on to its next form, just as our body changes throughout our lives. Similarly, and in a very natural way, In this verse, we learn that we also transmigrate to another body again at the time of death. We don't die, as it's not possible for us to die. We are eternal. We have other videos that address the topic of reincarnation, so we won't get into this topic at length right now. But there is another important takeaway from this verse that does apply to us right now. Remember the slide we discussed in part 1, which listed various labels that we often use to describe ourselves, labels like human, woman, athlete, doctor, etc. Well, now, in light of this verse, it becomes clear that the external labels we sometimes use to define ourselves at various points in our lives don't truly define us. They are only relative to this particular body in this particular lifetime. Our material body is constantly changing in this life, and we transition to a different one at the time of our body's death. Our next body, if we stay in this material world, may not appear at all like our body does in this lifetime. Look around at the world around us and we can see how many bodies there are: plant, animal, human, etc. We take on different bodies according to our karma and desire. This knowledge of the eternal self that we gain from the Gita reinforces that our actual identity lies far beyond the temporary body and the labels associated with the body. Material labels are fleeting, tied to the external form we currently inhabit, but they don't capture the reality of who and what we actually really are, the eternal soul. Recognizing this helps to shift our perception, giving us a broader and deeper perspective on life, freeing us from the limitations of superficial identification with our material bodies. Now, to close, why is this knowledge important and necessary for us to have? A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada used the example that if we know how to drive a car properly, it will serve us well and we'll actually be able to drive to our destination. But if we do not know how, we will be in danger and probably even endanger others, or at the very least, we won't be moving or progressing very far in a car we don't know how to drive. Our material body can be compared to a car, and the soul is like the driver of that car. If we don't realize that we are the soul within the body, we risk driving poorly, misunderstanding ourselves and others, and potentially cultivating harmful attitudes, such as racism or sexism, wherein judgments are made purely on external, material differences. So the world needs this knowledge of the soul, of what we all have in common. When we understand who we really are and see others through that same lens, it naturally fosters unity, respect, and compassion for others. This knowledge is the foundation for a harmonious society. Bhakti Yoga gives us more freedom, more choice in how we live our lives. Do we want to simply move from one phase of life to another, from student to parent to grandparent and so on? Or do we want to live a life that is harmonious with the realization of who we truly are, the soul, and still have those other roles but with deeper meaning? Those who study the Bhagavad Gita and practice Bhakti Yoga have the potential to live a more informed and intentional life by applying the knowledge that they and everyone else are actually souls. When we understand this basic truth, we can act in ways that are truly beneficial for ourselves and others. It's like putting on a new pair of glasses with a freshly updated prescription. Suddenly, everything becomes clearer. Similarly, each lesson in Bhakti Yoga refines our vision, helping us better understand ourselves and the world around us. With this enhanced spiritual perspective, we can consciously direct our lives, making decisions grounded in spiritual wisdom coming from the Supreme Himself, rather than from temporary material considerations based on our own speculation. So that's all we have for now on the nature of the self, Of course, this is just the beginning in terms of understanding who we are, and we'll dive deeper into this topic in future sessions. It's such a vast and profound area of study. For now, though, we'd love to hear any questions you have about today's material. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on Bhakti Fundamentals.